these meetings. I've been just kind of attending to it occasionally to see how they're doing. A lot of work has gone into preparing all this. So it's a couple minutes past 5. I think I'll just get started because you all have a lot to cover. And I'm just going to say good evening. And welcome to the first meeting of the Waterfield Lot Task Force. This was created to advise the Select Board on its upcoming renegotiations with Civico on the development for the Waterfield parking lot. I'm Susan Verdicchio, Chair of the Winchester Select Board, and I want to welcome and thank all the members of the task force and all of you for joining us. And also just hand off to Town Manager Lisa Wong, Town Planner Brian Zakelli, and Affordable Housing Trust member Marty Jones, who will be assisting in facilitating this meeting. So without any further ado, Lisa, you want to take it over for now?
Sure. Thank you, Susan. So I'll do kind of the first half of the meeting, and then Brian will take over for the second. So you have a strong support staff here, so please use us to facilitate any questions or concerns that you have along the way. But Brian has put up a schedule of the meeting today, starting off with introductions. I do want to note that we have 5 task force members that are here, but we also have more than 5 that are joining us on the panel right now. That's because we do have representatives from FinCom, we have staff members here, and certainly our select board chair. So as we do introductions, if we could also let each other and the folks that are participating on Zoom and watching on WinCam know who you are specifically. And if you have any brief statements to make at this point in time, especially about your, your perspective coming in, just no more than a minute, please do so at this point in time. So I'll start with myself. I'm Lisa Wong, currently the town manager, helping to facilitate this task force, which has been charged with a number of responsibilities by the select board, which we will go over later on in the meeting. But happy to be here to talk about an important issue in town that a number of people have been working on for many years, including myself, but sort of taking part in this from a long history of background, which Brian will go through in terms of the number of activities and plans and input that have gotten us to this stage. So with that being said, why don't I turn it over to Brian and Marty, who will be helping to facilitate the meeting. We'll go into the task force members, and we'll introduce others that are here as well.
Thanks, Lisa. My name is Brian Zakelli. I'm the town planner here in Winchester. I have a role in helping to implement the 2030 master plan, the housing production plan, and the rezoning of the center business district. And all 3 of those things are relate to this specific lot. So I'm here as staff support to answer questions about any and all things related to the lot, whether in the development world. So with that, I'll turn it back, or I'll turn it over to Marty Jones.
All right, good afternoon, everybody. I'm Marty Jones. I am a Winchester resident, a member of the Winchester Housing Partnership, a member of the Winchester Affordable Housing Trust, and my professional career has been in mixed income housing development and also urban development in the Boston area, as well as financing a lot of affordable housing and other developments as CEO at Mass Development for a number of years. So I hope I can bring a little bit of background on affordable and mixed income housing as we have this conversation over the next month. And I think I will turn it to Paul Manganaro. Why don't you go next, Paul? I think we'll just call on each other and keep it moving.
Okay, thank you, Marty. My name is Paul Manganaro. I'm representing the seat that was to be filled for Winchester for a Better Waterfield. I appreciate the opportunity. I've been a lifelong resident since 1976. It's almost lifelong, but far back that I can remember. I've been involved in several different volunteer roles in town, charitable entities. Our biggest accomplishment was as president. My biggest accomplishment town related was as president of the Winchester Field Development Council, with the help of many people in town and also the town, because it was a joint venture between private and public money. We raised over several $1 million for the renovation of field space for the entire community. I saw this question as dealing with the building development, but also it got to a point, sadly enough, that it turned into a referendum on our leadership in town, and it was more about the process. So I'm looking forward to reuniting the people, giving them faith again, and coming to a conclusion that's solid from all different perspectives, and making it like an antipasto dinner where everybody gets a little bit of something, and then with the main goal of doing what's best for Winchester. I feel like we can't solve one issue and cause another one. So look forward to working with all the good people on this committee and having a successful resolution. I will turn it over to Bill Cummins.
Good afternoon and good evening, everyone. I am a 50-plus year resident of town, and so by reason of my age, I've been here quite longer than many of you. I've probably been a 60-year business resident of Woburn by this time, where I've primarily almost my whole career have earned my livelihood and where I am today. My wife Joyce and our 4 children grew up in Winchester, attended Winchester schools, except for one who had special needs, and we are delighted to continue to be a part of the community, especially through Winchester activities and our involvement in the foundation, Cummings Foundation, which we formed 30 plus years ago. I am a one-time member and chairman of the Winchester Planning Board. I had several great years there and enjoyed it very much. Something I could probably surprise most of you, if not perhaps everyone listening, that I'm a former downtown Winchester business person. I did own and operate a store on Main Street in the heart of town for a period of time. I grew up as a kid in Medford, and my earliest involvement in Winchester was driving up to Winchester in my dad's old Model T, and would drive to Winchester to get cooled off. No kidding. Would drive to Winchester and get cooled off from out of Medford. So that's quite a few years ago. And I guess the next best thing after that was working in Randall's restaurant for a couple of years on Mount Vernon Street, and with Mrs. Price and Mr. Hoagland, who operated it at the time. Some of you might recognize those names. I'm delighted to be with you all this evening. And I don't know who to go to here, because you're the only people I can see now.
All right, why don't we go to Stephanie Zaremba next?
Hi, everyone. Good evening. My name is Stephanie Zaremba. I am filling the seat of representative from the Residents for Waterfield Facts, who supported a yes vote during the referendum, focused on making sure that we maintain the goals of increasing affordable housing in Winchester. I am not a lifelong resident, and not even a half resident, but I'm a town meeting member for Precinct 2 and live here with my family. And living in Medford before this, coming to Winchester was a lifelong goal. I've had family here. And I am just honored to be here and to participate in making our community more inclusive. I'll pass it over to Sumya.
You're muted. We can't hear you.
Sorry about that. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Hi. My name is Soumya Ganapathy, and I'm filling the position for the citizen at large. I've been a Winchester resident since 2014 and truly love the town. I love the downtown area, and I really enjoy being part of this community. I wanted to participate in this task force because I do think affordable housing is very important. And I also think it's important to have a vibrant downtown. I love walking to the downtown area. In my day job, I work at Beverly Hospital as a physician. And I will pass it to, see.
So Patrick is the final and fifth task force member. So Patrick,
Okay.
can you go next?
Thanks, Lisa. I'm Patrick Fortin, lifelong Winchester resident. I've owned a business in Winchester since the 80s and owned real estate in downtown Winchester since the early 90s. So I've spent 30, 40 years in and out of the center, even outside of growing up. I'm very involved with the chamber and here to help just make sure that the needs and wants and concerns of the downtown business communities community members are met. I kind of agree with Mango. It's really, the chamber is very concerned about parking, but I would call that one of a few things. They just really care about the center thriving and trying to make sure this is the best option. Transparency is key and making sure we just check all the boxes. So I'm here to help get a deal done and make it as good as we can make it. It might be exactly what we have. I don't know what, but I think happy to work with this crew and really just bring it back to the public in a way that they're excited to have it and we can all be excited about what's going to be there. And I don't know who's left, Lisa. So if I'm the last one, then I'll hand it back to you.
Yep. Let's actually move on to Enzo.
Great. Hi. Hi, everyone. Enzo Racinato. I'm here representing the Finance Committee. I've been in town like 6 years now. Obviously Finance Committee was very involved in the process for the Waterfield project last year when I was chair. I was also involved in the advisory group that worked with Lisa and Anderson Krieger to negotiate the terms of the deal and try to figure out the best way forward. So I do know quite a bit about the existing deal and some of those financial terms, as well as the models and some of the assumptions that we talked about. So I think I'm looking forward to the process. Thank you.
Thanks, Enzo. Patty, I know you're kind of the voice in the background, but do you want to introduce yourself?
Hi, everybody. Unfortunately, I don't have video on my computer. My name is Patty Mahalich. I am the Select Board Administrative Assistant, and I handle everything that has to do with Select Board and then everything else that has to do with the needs of the town manager. So I'll be assisting it when all of the meetings with anything that we need. And as a whole, you now have my email. If there's anything else that everybody needs, please just send me an email and we'll take care of it. Thank you.
Great. Next, we'll go to Town Council. We'll start with Mina and then Jillian.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Mina Macarius. I am, along with Art Krieger, Town Council for the town. I practice at the firm of Anderson and Krieger. In addition to our municipal work, we do a lot of real estate work. Jillian is in our real estate department, and we've done public private kind of partnerships and long-term leases for a variety of different clients over the years. This one is a particularly complicated project, a really interesting one. And our job here is, since neither of us live in town and neither does Art, is to advise and provide input on process and how things might work, and to eventually assist the select board in making their policy goals as informed by you, as I understand it, come true to the best we can. And that's where our negotiation role comes in. So Jillian, I'll turn it over to you.
Thanks, Mina, and good evening, everybody. Jillian Barger, Anderson Krieger. I will refrain from repeating everything Mina just said. I am the real estate specialist from Anderson Krieger on this deal. I worked on the LDA and the RFPs, and of course the key terms to the ground lease that was attached to the LDA. But other than that, I think Mina gave a good introduction of us both. So I'll pass it on to whoever is next.
Yep. So last but not least is a financial consultant that we've hired that I'll sort of review in more detail in the charge. But Lynn, can you take the opportunity to introduce yourself?
Sure. Good evening. I'm Lynn Sweet with LDS Consulting Group. A little bit new to this project, but realized not new to Winchester. I was involved with financial analysis when the Mount Vernon home was converted a number of years ago. And with regard to Bill Cummings, you may not remember me, but I did a lot of work with supportive living a number of years ago. So we crossed paths back in the day when Doug Stevens was alive. I have 35 plus years experience in affordable housing, multifamily housing, pretty much any type of housing. My company, LDS Consulting Group, is based in Wellesley. It's a 22-year-old company. We have done a similar consulting tasks for municipalities recently in Gloucester and Lincoln with properties that were also public-private partnerships such as this. We not only do financial analysis, we also work on fiscal impacts. Lisa, did you want me to go over the kind of my charge as to what I've been asked to do for this, or is that coming later on?
That will come up very soon.
All right,
So we'll
very
do that
nice.
then.
Very nice to meet everybody.
Great. Thank you, everyone. Okay, so I'm going to spend the next bit going over some logistics. So hopefully you see on your screen something that says Waterfield Lot Task Force meeting schedule. The task force should have received this via email. I did make some updates that you should have gotten actually prior to this meeting, and it was more just adjusting the time frame for some of the things that we're going to be discussing today. So the select board met on Monday, and I provided an update. The select board did have two people from the select board that are going to be part of the negotiating team. So that will be Mariano Goluboff and Rich Mucci. So I'll keep them updated as to the task force comments, recommendations, questions. We did discuss this document as well, but also the report template. So the end product of the task force is going to be a summary of the priority recommendations and your priority rankings for the 6 areas that we'll review. This is the first meeting of the task force. Right now we have 4 set up. This meeting is going to go over some basic things like open meeting law, public record procurement. We'll also be talking about the public comment period. There will be homework in between meetings. There is a bit of time between meetings. We want to make sure that the vast amount of information that we have and the questions you have, that we have that period to answer them and get those documents to everybody and post it in a transparent way. So on our website, winchester.us/Waterfield. The select board is actually not going to be meeting the 30th, so I will take that down. But the next meeting of the task force is going to be September 13th, which is also a pretty heavy day. The task force will be meeting slightly earlier from 4 to 6, reviewing the priority areas, going over the report, reviewing sort of the documents, and that's quite a bit of work. There's really reviewing the charges. And then there'll be a public comment meeting that will be an hour right after that meeting, and that'll be via Zoom. Select board is also going to be meeting later on that night, so I'll provide them with an update that night. And we'll start to set the negotiating dates with Civico. That will happen as soon as we have a report from this committee. The third meeting is going to be September 20th, also from 5 to 7. At that point in time, the comments from the September 13th meeting, as well as the written comments that are due on the 16th, we'll have that report out to the task force, as well as for all of you to begin your priority rankings and recommendations. Um, we'll also have much more further financial analysis as we get into this as well. There's a select board meeting on the 27th, so I'll provide an update then. Um, there's several sort of meetings leading up to town meeting. The town manager usually sets a public hearing. There's also some key dates, like we have to mail a town meeting warrant on October 12th, and the town meeting, of course, starts the 1st. The last meeting that we have set up for everyone is the 30th from 5 to 7. This is a working meeting. And certainly the homework between this meeting and the 4th is for this task force to finalize your report and have that sent to the select board so that they can have that for their meeting on October 4th. So I know that's a lot, but any questions on the schedule right now?
Should we raise our hand or just chime in?
Just chime in, Paul.
Okay, this is Paul. Thank you, Lisa, for that recap. Just some concerns just off the top of my head. I think as long as the schedule is flexible, I think it's wise to keep it flexible and don't set a hard due date, because it might look rushed and we really don't know what obstacles we're going to run into. And like Patrick mentioned earlier, transparency in this process and getting all the details on the table and coming to a consensus, if we can, would be very important moving forward. So is this just kind of a guideline, or are these drop dead due dates?
They're a little bit of both. So when the select board set up the initial charge, they actually wanted the report by September 15th. I think, the testament to the quality of people we have on this task force is also a testament to how busy and in demand you all are. So we've had a really hard time setting really any meeting dates in August. So because they've been pushed off to September, we've pushed off the due date for the report that's in the charge from September 15th to September 30th. The idea is that that needs to also give enough time for the select board to negotiate a land disposition agreement based on the report of the task force. The task force does have a pretty finite ranking that it needs to do. The ranking, if it's, I think if everybody sort of label things 1 through 6, what their top ranking is, there may not necessarily be a consensus. So the report can reflect that. I think there should be a robust debate. So Paul, if there needs to be more debate, then we need to figure out how maybe some of the briefing work we can do in a homework, or provide it via video or links, and provide more of the meeting time for that discussion and debate, and or try to find some of those meetings to work out those issues. But it is also incredibly valuable for the select board if there is, for example, and I'm just sort of making this up, but let's say there's, you're debating between whether one is a priority or 2 is a priority, and they're very close. Certainly those kinds of nuances can be reflected in a report. But I think that the reason for the ranking system is that it's not necessarily a consensus ranking, but it might have to be a kind of a cumulative ranking of the whole group. And that's something that we'll have to discuss too, is that the board can, we'll have, either individuals rank or try to rank it cumulatively and try to reflect the most nuanced information in that report. So if, for example, 4 people think that one thing is a priority and 1 thinks it's the least priority, we don't want that opinion to be lost in the report. We want to make sure to be able to reflect that. And that's why I think the report structure should be not just the ranking, but any concerns, comments, trade-offs, recommendations, so that all of it's in there. It's not just 6 things and a number, but all those concerns are in there.
Okay. Go ahead, Stephanie.
Yeah, Paul, I share your concern, and I just want to a tiny bit more. I think what you've outlined here is really well organized, and the homework will get done. But on the select board meeting on Monday, Mr. Dickio mentioned the possibility of convening a special town meeting if needed, and I just want to put a stake in the ground here
and say other task force members' opinions, but I do think that while we're ranking priority, a really big priority is that we give this the time and the discussion it needs. If these meetings as outlined are all the discussion we need, that's fantastic. But I'll just put it out there now that if we all feel like we need more time, I am very supportive of asking the select board to please let it take the time it needs to get the right outcome and convene a special session of town meeting rather than go back to town meeting with something that even some percentage of the town feels was rushed and again, not the right outcome.
Yeah. And all that makes sense. And certainly offline, I can reach out to all of you and try to get more of your times, whether, for example, some of these meetings can start earlier or end later, and or we can find other, other things where certain members might be tasked to do some of the report writing, and or have the staff help do that. So yeah, we're open to any of that, but I certainly hear you. And I think that I don't know if Susan's still on, but I would say she would probably agree with your sentiment to get it done right.
Yes, I am still listening. And, I did say that a special town meeting is a possibility. We certainly want to be sure that you guys, the task force has enough time to deliberate and discuss this. And by the same token, we do want to have time to negotiate with the Civico folks as well. So, I appreciate your concerns, and I really do. And let's try to make these as productive as possible. And again, I want to, if I didn't say this in my intro, I really thank and deeply appreciate all of the members of the task force volunteering to serve the town in this capacity. So we'll play it by ear. I understand. Thank you.
Yeah. Thanks, Susan. We will give it I think I can speak for these people I'm just meeting for the first time when I say we will give it our all on this time frame.
Yeah. Thank you. And Lisa, I'd just like to add one more thing. I'm glad to hear that it's going to be an open format, not just restricted to the 6 topics, because it would be like going to an ice cream store with 37 different flavors and only being able to pick from 6. So that's good. I also wanted to ask 2 things. How much authority, how far along is this task force going to be kept intact? Is there any possibility that would be a representative from the task force would be part of the negotiations? And also, is there any chance, and I'd respect everybody's opinion and ideas on this, any chance we could possibly meet in person with masks in a large room? I think that's more productive, and well, at least for myself, and I found in meetings it's more productive and it helps move things forward a lot faster than these Zoom calls, even though I realize because of the times we might have to be restricted to Zoom. So thank you very much.
So I think that's something that I can organize offline as well. I can ask the task force members if they feel comfortable online. I do want to, I'm sorry, in person. I do want to make sure that as much as possible we accommodate everybody. And if it's some level of hybrid, I also want to just make sure that we have, sort of equitable access to information, to talk, and so on.
And what about representation from this committee? Like when we go in front of this, when you go in front of the select board, I think maybe we should talk about maybe naming a chairperson and having at least that one person present at all times. And is there any chance that we'll have representation at the negotiation?
Oh, sorry, Paul. I missed a bit of that.
Excuse me. Hey, that's what happens when you have fat fingers. I hit the mute button. Is there any chance of representation at the negotiation table too from the chairperson if we elect to have one from this group?
I can't speak for the whole board. The whole board did approve this charge, and the plan that it embodies is for the task force to advise the select board. I know you folks will do a good job, and you're going to meet multiple times. So we're looking to rely on the report, and it may make sense for you to stay in touch and maybe meet during the negotiations if we need to bring something back to you. I don't think it's part of the charge, and I don't think it's a good idea to have anybody from the task force actually in the negotiation sessions. I really think that that's a firm line that we have to draw. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for the explanation.
I do want to say that I have the negotiating team right down here, and it's essentially up to 8 or 9 people so far. The um, one of the things that we can do is we can certainly keep the task force together and seek formal input even after a report is submitted. So I can keep you in the loop. Certainly, um, you know, I think the negotiations will be pretty finite in terms of as we go over the legal documents. You know, the legal documents are um, are kind of what they are, but the terminology, the numbers, the 6 things that you're just going to be discussing um, are really the meat of what can change in a document. And certainly, we want to keep you informed and in the loop, and all those different perspectives at play.
Maybe I'm wrong on this, Lisa, and I don't even mean to interrupt, but I believe the vote, the people have spoken, and I think everything's up for renegotiation. Not that I'm seeking that, but I don't. My understanding is the town is not bound to anything at this point because the vote was taken, the people have spoken, and unless there was some signed documents that we don't know, we're not aware of. But my understanding is everything should be on the table.
So I think as we get into this discussion, we'll get a sense of specifically what you might mean. Because when we do give the briefing, certainly we'll touch upon these 6 things, but we'll also sort of touch upon the process, the project as a whole. So if there are specific terms you're talking about, or if you're talking about the project at large, we'll I think we'll certainly have time for those kinds of discussions.
Okay, thank you.
Great. So I am going to spend time going over the charge, and this is also an area in which you can ask questions. We've got about 25 minutes assigned to this, so if this goes quickly, then we can jump into the presentations and then also the Q&A that you guys have. But I just want to make sure that everybody understands and has all their questions answered. So the charge of the task force, the first is to attend a briefing and review materials provided to the task force on the issues and concerns surrounding the development of the Waterfield lot, the availability of affordable housing in Winchester, the financing of mixed income housing developments, the cost of garage parking facilities, and the Civico proposal. In several of your emails organizing these meetings, a lot of your emails, you'll notice that you have links to documents that are on the website. I think it's important for us not just to make sure that they're publicly available. So any documents you receive will also be put on the website, but they're also easy to find and easy to understand. Because it's not just enough to have it there. We I think need to help the public understand exactly what kind of information we're putting out, where to find it, and that's also where your input will be wonderful as well. So that includes links to WinCam recording for these meetings. It includes the PowerPoint presentations that we'll put out. It includes the financial analysis. It'll also include questions and answers. And I know that some of you have already provided us with questions. We're working on those answers, and we hope to also post all of those on the website as well. So even questions that come up during the meetings, the public comments that we receive in our office, we'll have those on the website, but we'll also try to organize it so you can clearly see where the Q&A is. You can clearly see where things related to financial analyses are, things related to parking, things related to major questions you might have. That information is available. So any questions about the amount of material that you're receiving, that the public's receiving, and how we plan to share that?
Lisa, I don't want to beat it to death, but so is reading this in the charge. So is the expectation of the selectmen that Civico's getting the deal and that's already committed, and this is just to revisit the deal, or is this, starting over and relooking at the whole proposal?
So the select board had a discussion about this, and they would like to still move forward with Civico. They are the top choice of the select board. But if the report shows priorities and questions and concerns that make it that Civico is not the developer, because either they choose to withdraw, or there is, yeah, and I don't want to speculate, but maybe there's something else that um, makes them not able to be the top choice. The select board has already had a vote that they were the number one proposal. So um, the town council will go over this a little bit more. There are um, certain things that we can do within the procurement process that's already been started. Um, to start the entire procurement process over in its entirety is another story that is either going to be something that is a chosen path, or something that is not chosen, but we're not able to move forward with any of the developers if certain conditions arise. So I don't know if that makes sense now, or if you maybe want to wait on some of those questions when we go over procurement.
Yeah, I'm not trying to be difficult. I'm just trying to understand what we're supposed to do, because if Civico's a done deal, I mean, we might as well know it and have to. I mean, I don't think that's what the town wanted. And I don't want to sound Mango, and I haven't even talked about this. So I don't want to sound like I'm, echoing his, but I get the sense from the town and even from the Chamber of Businesses, they wanted this thing to start over again. But if we're not starting over, we might as well know we're not starting over, and it is what it is. Maybe I'm just a little slow and I'm confused, but I thought this was start in the beginning. If the selectmen want Civico, I think someone should say it so we know where we're at.
We get Lisa, I'm sorry, I don't want to jump too far around in your agenda, but to address Patrick's question, is that something that town council could weigh in on? Because there are like a number of steps in the procurement process, and the referendum vote was on a specific step in the process from RFP to done deal. And I'm curious if there's legal guidance that, select board opinion aside, if there's actually any legal guidance for what we should be looking at.
So I will say that there is, and that we will go over that in the business agenda. This is sort of the intro agenda. So if you sort of look at our agenda, that's later on. Again, I don't know if Susan wants to weigh in, but there to
yeah, I mean, I would defer to Mina to some extent, to town council on this. But I would just remind everybody that there was a town meeting vote authorizing the select board to negotiate with Civico, sort of affirming that they had been, the top ranked during the procurement process, and voted by the select board as the person to contact, to the entity to enter into negotiations with. So that's also in there as the context that the town meeting voted.
And that was not what the referendum was on, Susan, right? That was fall 2020 town meeting, that town meeting approved Civico, and the referendum was specifically on town meeting's approval of the LDA. Is that correct?
That's my understanding, yes.
Thanks.
Of those two votes, yes.
So to review the charge of the task force, let me just sort of maybe go through this, and maybe it might make sense. So, so the first part is really to attend these briefings and receive and review these materials. The second is to provide for public input. So to have at least one public meeting for community input, and also consider input that is received by my office. And you'll see in the agenda that we went before, it's the September 13th meeting. We can certainly provide more forums if this task force feels appropriate. It also is receiving feedback in writing by the 16th. And then that report is sort of given and tabulated for the task force to consider in their deliberations. So any discussion about providing different more means of public input? Okay, and just because you don't think of something now doesn't mean that you can't chime in later, and especially if we find more ways to make this robust. The third charge is to work with an independent financial consultant to provide information that will be helpful to the select board and the general public's understanding of the project. There was discussion about having a financial analysis. The town put together a scope seeking a consultant to do a financial analysis of this project and of not just Civica's project, but sort of affordable housing in general. And we submitted it to several qualified firms, received back her proposal from Lynn and negotiated with her. So we think she's highly qualified to do this job, and she is at yours and the select board's disposal in terms of being able to ask questions related to the financial scope and be able to provide answers and analysis for you.
Please, I have a question. With all due respect to Lynn, who picked this financial firm, and would it have been maybe better if this task force had some input on that? Just moving forward, thinking about issues like that.
Yeah, a couple things. So because of procurement, if the task force picked the person, we would not have had a consultant on board probably towards the end of September. So that was sort of problem number one, is that just the timing, we couldn't get the task force to meet and weigh in. And the procurement process does take at least 3, if not more weeks to put together, to advertise, and then to get consultants to respond. So we worked through our networks. We reached out to quasi-public state agencies that work with financial consultants. We also asked for recommendations from existing consultants that we use. We sent it out to, I believe, at least 6 qualified financial consultants, any of which I think you would have all wanted to work with. Lynn was the only one that responded. But, like I said, any one of the 6 was highly qualified and has been, doing this work for a while.
Okay, thank you. I'd just like to echo Stephanie's comments. I don't think we should make a timeline a priority over complete transparency, because it's major importance to gain the trust and the faith back of the entire community. But thank you for that explanation.
Lynn, at this point in time, do you want to weigh in a little bit more about the work that you'll be doing?
Sure, thank you very much. So basically what we're going to prepare is a memo that will answer for the 4 following questions. And I certainly would like to hear if there are any more questions from the task force. And that memo, the initial memo that we're doing, is going to be analyzing Civico's proposal. So the first question is, are the financial estimates as it relates to development costs provided by Civico development reasonable? And the next is, are the financial estimates as it relates to operating costs provided by Civico development reasonable? Then, are the financial estimates as it relates to revenue provided by Civico development reasonable? And I think the one probably you're most interested in is, are the financial estimates as it relates to sources and uses by Civico development reasonable? Therefore, is the $1 million purchase price in terms noted in the land disposition agreement reasonable compensation to the town for the property? So we will basically, we have gotten more detailed information than was available in the public documentation during the procurement process, more detailed line items. We've asked a lot of questions to kind of go behind the numbers with Civico to prepare our preliminary findings. And, what we're hoping to be able to answer those questions, come up with conclusions and recommendations that will aid the task force in doing their work.
Any questions for Lynn at this time? Okay. Well, like I said, I'm sorry, go ahead, Marty.
No, I just wanted to add one thing, because I think I want to make sure my understanding is correct. The select board did vote to renegotiate with Civico and to make the deal better for the town based on what was the conversations that came out of the referendum. And so it's my understanding that the charge to this group is to say what can be done in these priority areas and maybe other areas that might come up to renegotiate with Civico and make the deal better for the town. So that's my understanding, that it's framed in that way. And I just wanted to make sure that that was the common understanding.
Yes, yes, Marty, that's true. That's
Yeah,
true. We did vote that we still thought Civico was the best project, but the idea behind the task force was to see if we could make it a little better for the town, you know, to meet the needs of the town.
And our job is to really educate you about the different parts of the numbers. And in particular, affordable housing has a lot of acronyms. It in a public-private partnership also is just it's a different kind of an animal. So we're really here as a resource for everybody to, as I said, go behind the numbers, explain how the different sources and uses work, and see if we can make recommendations that will be beneficial to the town.
Can I suggest that the situation that Marty was describing, and going back to where Patrick was before, the idea of this group making recommendations of methods by which the actual negotiating committee will work, with the understanding that it's going to be a Civico project no matter what, is certainly greatly inhibiting their ability to negotiate much of anything. It would seem that there should be some clarification that suggests or says outright, it would seem to me anyway, that the committee, this committee, will make recommendations, and that the negotiating committee will then find out from Civico right off the bat if there's a reason to go forward, and do we have common ground here somewhere, and are they prepared to sit with the negotiating committee and actually negotiate, with the understanding that they won't do the project if they don't negotiate something. But if you don't have that laid out there and pretty clearly understood, it puts your negotiating committee in a very bad position.
Absolutely. I think you're right, Bill, that you know, this is a deal to make better, and it's a two-way negotiation. So if what the town wants, you know, Civico can't agree to, then they don't get it no matter what. I agree with that.
Is there also a little bit of an open point, I guess, on the procurement side? I think it's something we'll hear from Mina maybe a little bit later. But if you change the relative criteria for the deal from procurement perspective, does that mean that you have to open up the RFP again? Because now, you know, the different bidders bid based on what they thought the criteria was, and if that criteria is now changed, maybe they'd like to rebid. You know, I think to Bill's point as well, if you're only negotiating against one person, you're not gonna get as good of a deal as if you potentially opened it up to the other bidders as well.
I don't know if Mina, you want to weigh in very
Lisa,
quickly on this.
Yeah, no, it actually might be helpful. I think since the conversation's raised here, I think it's better to talk about it in this context. I think the way Enzo just put it is exactly where the legal issue kind of hits here. So there was a vote to issue an RFP and then a follow-up vote to begin negotiations with the selected bidder of that RFP. That vote from both the select board, which is required, and town meeting, which wasn't required, but was sort of an extra process in the select board's opinion to promote more transparency. That's in fall 2020. That step included negotiating with Civico, and if those negotiations fail, with Penrose. If the conversations based on the feedback from this group as then incorporated into what the negotiating team takes back, lead either one or both sides to say, well, this just isn't going to work based on what Civico has. The options are to go to Penrose, who's been identified as a backup entity to negotiate with under the current RFP, or if it's simply the feedback and sort of where the town's direction is vastly different from the RFP that was issued almost 2 years ago, I think now, that that would require issuing a new RFP. The balance of exactly where the line is before you have to go back out to bid versus negotiating in this kind of deal isn't a clear one. It's not a bright line, I should say, because there was an understanding that there'd be negotiations with the selected bidder on a host of factors, and including on the terms of the lease and the final terms of the LDA. But if there's something that would cause essentially a whole different suite of bidders or a different kind of bid to have been provided, that's the kind of thing that might trigger the need to go out to bid with an entirely new package, basically cancel this procurement and start an entirely new bid process. That's a decision that the select board can make essentially at any time to start a new bid process without a prior town meeting vote. Nothing, however, can be signed as a long-term lease or a disposition of land without a town meeting vote. That's the only part that really requires that legally. Everything else is within that discretion.
Mina, I think I understand you to have suggested that the negotiating committee could very easily fall back to the number 2 choice without disturbing much of anything. And if that were the case, then you've got 2 active bidders, just like at an auction, who both want to buy the Picasso, and the deal can get better and better. And the secret in my mind on this is to find ways that you can help the bidders, the developers, to cut their costs in some way, take out something that's particularly expensive, and perhaps substitute something else that's particularly valuable to the town that might even cost less, but to do things of that nature. But there has to be somebody else clearly in the wings waiting to come in, and even to the extent of meeting a little bit with other people and finding out what the potential is. And that's something that is, or with their ilk, other people doing the same thing, not necessarily the active bidders.
Yeah, and Bill, just to sort of put a little bit of a nuanced point on what you just said, to be clear, the waiting in the wings language you use is the appropriate one. I would not perceive this as a situation where you can today, basically create a competition between the two, because the select board's vote after opening the RFP, and following the procurement process, was a clear number 1, and only if negotiations fail with them, then going to number 2. So Civico knows that and may have that in the back of their mind. I can't read into what they think, but that's why I would I guess just caution that it's not a best and final offer kind of process or something like that, which you sometimes see outside of public bidding, where you're able to do a bit more of that kind of conversation.
And I don't want to make this more complicated than it needs to be, but I think if, the whatever it was, percentage of the people in the town that voted, to revisit this project, I think their expectation, revisit does not mean go back to where you were and try and, move a couple, decimal points. I think I'm with Bill all the way. 2 people's better than 1, but 6 is better than 2. And I don't know why. I think creating a new RFP is the right way to create transparency and rebuild this thing and put it back out there, even if it's not that different. And let's see what people do.
Patrick, I vehemently disagree. I think that's something the task force, either our charge needs to be made very clear, but from my perspective, the language that was voted on, when you filled in your bubble, the language was very clear. And it did not say revisit. If people went to the polls thinking they were voting to open it back up,
That's literally not what it said. And so I don't agree that that's what the town has asked us to do. If people think that's what they asked us to do, that's a bigger thing that requires a different process than what was done in that referendum.
Yeah, and I don't want to, I'm not, I'm far from a lawyer, so I'm not here to, I'm talking public perception over legal merits. And if legally we're in a box, and it is what it is. But I think we should be transparent with the town on what the box is and where we're at. And at minimum, I like Bill's point, at least we should be in discussion with two of them. I still creates weakness for the town, which if that's, if that's what it is, that's what it is. We got to deal with what we're dealt. But if that's the, if that's the perception of where we're at, then we have to play in that sandbox. I get that.
If I could maybe, I'm sorry, go ahead, Sonia.
No, I was just going to say that Civical has already spent a lot of money with the town making their proposals. So I think they'd be more likely to negotiate with us as compared to someone who hasn't invested a lot of money with us yet.
So I did want to just, sorry, didn't want to interrupt the flow of the conversation, but I did want to just interrupt to say that I am sort of turning over the facilitation to Brian as I have another 6 o'clock meeting. So I will be checking back in and I will be fully present for all your future meetings, but just want to hand the scepter over to Brian. And thank you all again.
Wonderful timing. I was trying to clear up a lot of what we have been talking about, specifically the charge and why we're here and how it affects everything. So looking at these 6 items, these are what are in the charge that this group has to do basically 2 things. So I'm going to try to make it as clear, and then we can move on for the rest of the agenda if possible. But one is the ranking, like Lisa said, meaning out of all of these 6 things, so this is regardless of the Civico proposal. This is just what is most important to you out of all of these, just these things. This is the charge from the select board. Then on top of that, what we've been given, or what you've been given the responsibility to do, is to highlight all of the concerns of these 6 things with the Civico proposal. That's it. Those are the 2. That's the 2, and that's what the report is supposed to say. This is what we find important, and also looking at the Civico proposal specifically. Where does it fall short? What are the concerns? What are the benefits? So that's what the report is supposed to contain. I'd like to open it up then now with the hopes that it's clear what we're doing, because it's extremely important to get this right from the beginning, rather than with 3 meetings in and we got 1 more meeting and we do not produce something worthwhile. So I think it's important to finish the conversation, but please, I think now's the time for us to, I think we can spend a little bit of time on this, not 20 minutes, but more than 5 kind of thing. So please, the floor is anyone's. I think the easiest is raise your hand, and if you can't do that, I'm looking at everyone's face, and you can just kind of go for it. I'm not seeing anybody. That's great.
Oh,
okay.
Brian, this is Paul. I don't have the raise.
No worries. Go right ahead, please.
I think I understand this correctly. So these are 6 items we're to touch on and rank, but we also are not boxed into these 6. We can make recommendations or express our thoughts as already expressed here by Bill, Pat, and Stephanie, and myself, and Sonia, and others. So we're not just bound to these 6, correct?
I think that's the priority, me using a bad word, but the idea is that these things do need to be in the report, and anything extra, I'm sure, is fair game. But this is what was required of you. So you can always provide more information, like specifically other things that you're talking about, but you can't ignore the ranking of these 6 things and the concerns, benefits, whatever analysis of the Civico proposal related to these 6 things.
So Brian, would you recommend that we focus on these items first and then focus on the other issues at hand?
So what I was going to go, well, right now, what we were going to go into is open meeting law with legal counsel, and then we were going to try to get to design. So it's that second one, and start design tonight, and then move forward throughout all of these, having as robust a discussion as possible through Zoom. So I think, yeah, still the floor is still open for things related to the charge and what we have to do. We can provide, what we found out is we can provide more than what's in the charge, but the charge needs to happen.
And the idea is there will be briefings or presentations on each of these 6 issues in your meetings, so that will provide some starting points for a discussion of each of the 6 items. So that's kind of on the schedule for the next few meetings.
Thanks for that. You will be getting a lot of information, folks. Okay, I think with that, I'm going to switch gears. I'm going to do a new share, and I'm going to turn it over to Anderson and Krieger.
Brian, before you turn it over,
Please, Bill, please, yes.
have you thought about the possibility of doing something like this and in just a simple email query to each one of us, ask the group to identify perhaps the 3 most important things to them, not rank them the most, the second most, but the 3 most important things, and have that. And sometimes with a group like this, you can focus in quite a bit and find out what the real concerns are of the group, because everyone, no matter what your position might be on the whole concept, would have some things that you would think there should be some significant adjustment made. And to do that, then you've got a summary vote, and it's very easy to do it, certainly, as you'd recognize, and comes up with just a really good, just a straw vote effectively that doesn't amount to anything, it doesn't mean anything, but it might tell you where you want to begin in a subsequent meeting.
I think that's certainly, yeah, worth pursuing, and that makes sense.
I'm not suggesting it should be a secret vote either. I think we should all vote with, and if have it available, so if anybody wants to know what each person voted for, that's fine. That's good. But just to see where the common ground is, and you might find that there'd be a lot of interest in certain things and not so much in the others.
I can certainly put a very quick several question survey to the group and do that. I think that makes sense. Thank you for that idea, and we will do that. Anything else before I turn it over to Anderson and Krieger? Okay. Give me just a second here, and I will.
So Brian, is it possible for you to manage the slides to avoid making a presentation on the open meeting law even more painful for everybody? If I try to share?
That's fine.
And I will try to be quick. This is, I know why this is not why anyone ever gets involved in town government, but it kind of comes with the territory. So we just wanted to go over some of the basics. I know many, but based on the intros, many, if not all of you, have had some experience volunteering on town or other public sector boards or committees, but we just wanted to quickly go through some of the key points here as they'll apply to you.
Sorry there.
That's all right.
Having issues able. Speaking of which is odd because they do this all the time, but for some reason your PowerPoint doesn't like it. I'll try one more time. Okay. So how about now?
All right. Thank you. There we go. So as you know, all public bodies, which includes you in this case, the task force, have to post their meetings publicly. And importantly, and this is what we'll spend the most of the next couple of minutes on, is all meetings and all deliberations. And what that means is the key part, have to be open to the public if they're among a quorum of you. So among enough that will constitute a majority. You also have to keep minutes for all meetings, and those have to be published. The good news is town staff and consultants are basically taking the load on most of the logistical stuff and do a fantastic job with that all the time. Patty will take very good care of you as she does all the other boards. So Brian, you can keep it moving. So we just talked about that. That's, by the way, just as to be clear, public body is a quorum of a group. It doesn't include town department staff. So although you see different staff and consultants, contractors, et cetera here, those folks are not subject to the open meeting law. So Lisa meeting with Brian in her office to do day-to-day work does not constitute an open meeting. Subcommittees do. You may decide to form different working groups or subcommittees. If and when you get to that point, we can always happy to chat with Marty or Brian or anybody else about how that might work and whether you want it to be something that's open have its own separate meetings, or whether it's going to be doing kind of work separate from open meetings. And obviously that's an important just thing to keep in mind. So here's the biggest thing. A deliberation is basically any discussion of any kind, electronic or not, between a quorum of the board. There's a couple of exceptions to it. Most of them won't apply to you. The public or private social gatherings seems to have been much less important over the past 2 years than it used to be, or to worry about at all. You may end up with a site inspection, for instance, if you wanted to look at the Waterfield site. That would not necessarily require posting, as long as you don't talk about, you're basically just looking around. Town meeting itself is not. You may be asked, for instance, as a group to weigh in on how the project has gone by the time this reaches town meeting, whenever that is. You don't need to post a separate meeting for that. Brian, you can keep going. So here's the biggest thing. Oral or written communication through any medium, including electronic mail, yada, 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 between a quorum of the board. So here's the tough part about this, is this means, I'll just use this as an example. One of you gets the meeting information that you got from staff over the past couple of days, and has a thought that you say, at the meeting, I'm going to be asking about this particular point, or it struck me looking at this that there's this issue. It's a perfectly human reaction. It's a perfectly reasonable way that anyone who's ever been in a business setting, nonprofit, et cetera, would do their work. Unfortunately, the way the open meeting law is written and the way the courts have interpreted it, sending that email might be a violation of the open meeting law, because now one of you is informed more than a quorum of the board, or excuse me, of the task force, what you think about a subject within your purview. And so that is something you should, if you have those kinds of things, any kind of thoughts, any questions, corrections, it's best to, and this is sort of coming to the next point, and as I mentioned, this is true. This is a court case from 2018 that kind of clarifies this from Wayland, and I won't bother any with that. So what do you do instead? If you have these kind of questions, if you're drafting the report that you want to send to the select board, let's say you decide to do that in writing, and you want to include edits, there's a couple of options that preserve transparency for the public and allow you to get stuff done if you need to. One is to work through staff in the sense of sending things to staff for them to collate comments. As long as they don't share them back with the task force until the next meeting, that's okay. Essentially, it's not coming back to something that should be discussed in the group. Another is for if there is a document, let's say, that's edited by multiple people, and let's say Brian collects the comments. Once he does, he could distribute it back to all of you, as long as you make it public at the same time. And that's both gives the public a chance to look at it and avoids everybody having to sit at the meeting and read each other's comments for the first time, sitting there slowly. The key thing is just being careful about, we're all, I'm sure, casual about email, text messages, um, Facebook messages, chats, whatever, what have you. We all communicate that way these days. It's very quick, it's very easy. And unfortunately, again, this is a law, although it was written recently, that's written that kind of presumes that is as hard as sitting down, writing a secret letter and distributing it on purpose to other people. It treats it the same way. And whether or not you intended to sort of keep something from folks or not, doesn't matter. So be very careful with what goes into any email. So we got all that. We know you're a public body deliberating and in a meeting. That's sort of, what do you have to do to set up a meeting? Again, and Brian, you could probably skip right through these slides unless folks have questions on it. It's about notice and setting up the meeting. Again, I think a lot of that is going to be handled for you by staff and for agenda setting purposes, et cetera. Meeting procedures, Brian has sort of taken on the role of moderating, so it'll essentially be deciding, how to kind of keep moving through an agenda. You're all members of the task force. There's no sort of priority on that, but just to keep things going. Just a note regarding public participation, in case you decide to have public participation at any of these meetings. The chair, can't tell people what to say, but he can just, or the moderator, but can decide when to say them and have reasonable limits on the amount of time, et cetera, again, to keep things moving. And while First Amendment speech protects, again, what you say, acting in a way that might disrupt the meeting isn't protected. Not that I expect that to be an issue, but that's one of the things. You also don't necessarily, because you're having an open meeting, need to allow public participation. You can decide as a group when it's appropriate and not. I'll skip right over that because I think folks do enough for you know it. The last thing is you may find yourselves in a situation, especially if you're called on to sort of advise the negotiating group kind of more back and forth, to decide they would like to have a conversation in executive session. There are limited purposes that the statute allows you to meet in executive session, and you have to say that that's what you're doing. Frankly, the only one that might be at issue at all in your case, well, there's a whole process to it that is very important to follow, as you see at the bottom. They're not technicalities, but because they often lead to complaints and they often lead to issues. But they're with things we can certainly walk you through if we get there. So Brian, you can, the one that really will matter to you is number 6 on this page, acquisition of real property. The legislator recognizes, sort of apropos of the comment that Bill and I were discussing earlier, that their public entities are already somewhat disadvantaged when it comes to the real estate process compared to, excuse me, I'm having an open meeting with my toddlers in the nearby here. Excuse me, give me 1 second. I'll pretend the fig leaf of me closing the door means you won't ever hear them again. So sorry about that. You may decide you need to have a conversation. You don't necessarily want Civico to hear, or Penrose or whomever else is you're sort of advising, negotiating team about. And this is meant to be a limited purpose, to be able to have that conversation about a negotiating position. It's not for all real estate. Obviously, everyone knows what real estate parcel we're talking about. This doesn't cover all of your dealings. It's really limited for negotiations. You may never use it, but it's there. Beyond that, Brian, just very quickly, there's a sort of corollary. It's a different statute. It's a public records piece. I won't go through the whole response process, but just keep in mind that now that you are acting as part of the town, as town entity, as town bodies, basically any communication between you any communication about this task force, the subject of this task force, in your official capacity is probably going to be a public record. And actually, Brian, if you go to the next page, which I think is the last one, and one more, I think. Yeah, that the real issue for you is just, you know, sort of keeping good hygiene about public records. If you haven't already, it wouldn't be a bad idea to have a separate, for instance, just set up a separate Gmail address for all of your emails related to this. If you get a public records request, that'll save you the trouble of having to search through all your private email for it. It also, you know, again, be careful about what you say and knowing this hat that you're wearing. That's not to say to limit you in any way from speaking your mind here or anywhere else in a public forum. You still have all of your First Amendment rights, obviously, to do that. But remember that when you say something, it may be perceived as coming from you, task force member, as opposed to, you know, you, private citizen. And I think that's it. So this was a very quick run through that. And happy to take questions on it. You know, there are day-long seminars on this. Wasn't intended to be, you know, the deepest of dives into it, but just a reorienting folks who maybe haven't done this in a little bit.
You can either raise your hand function, or the question and answer function. Jimmy?
Oh, no, sorry.
No, all right. Right now, I see looks like there are other people that are raising their hand outside of the panelists, but I don't believe we're opening this up to the public yet. I believe that is the start of the September 13th. So anyone from the task force have any questions for legal counsel related to open meeting?
So just a quick one. A quorum is then 3 people because there's 5 of them.
Correct. Yeah. Yeah. So there may be times where 2 people are talking. One thing, just to not to again get down the rabbit hole on this, but Enzo's question compels me to say it, I guess, is a quorum is 3 people, but what it doesn't mean, there's actually a bunch of cases on this, is if one of you, you know, 2 of you talk, one of those 2 people shouldn't go talk to a third person about the same thing. Or if you do, you ought to be really careful not to say, well, you know, I was just talking to Stephanie and she said the same thing, because now it's what the courts call serial deliberation. You've kind of moved it through 5 people.
Sorry, I may have misunderstood. I thought there was a section that said 2 people form a subcommittee and are also then subject to the law.
If you form there's a little bit of a tricky issue of when are 2 people a subcommittee. So if you are just talking to another member, you haven't been designated by the rest of your task force as the subcommittee on the financial analysis, right? You know, it's nothing formal at all, and you happen to raise something that's in your task force, that's not a violation of the open meeting law. That's less than a quorum, as long as you don't start spreading it to others. However, if the group decides we really need 2 people to go work on X issue, it's still not necessarily a subcommittee, but it's much more likely. You've now sort of there's a whole test to it that basically the test is, are you acting independently and just coming back with advice that's a recommendation, or are you, you know, doing some work that's eventually going to go to the rest of the group? There's no need to go deep into it, but essentially you're not just a subcommittee just because you saw someone on the street and wanted to talk to them for a minute or so on. It's really only if as a group you designate, you know, you and Paul to go look at one issue, or you know, whatever.
So if I email Mr. Cummings and I say, loved that point you made, totally agree, a violation of open meeting law is subject to records request and could be made public.
Not a violation of the open meeting law on its own. Probably subject to the public records law for the request, could be made public. If Bill forwards it then to Paul and says, "See, I told you my point was a great one. You know that everybody else likes it. Now you violated the open meeting law. You haven't, he has, but you as a group have, because 3 of you have been in the conversation."
What a lovely law. Great.
It's it has a lot of, the point of it is, and I think, the word transparency came up a lot during this conversation. And the point of the open meeting law, the intent and the spirit of it is to really save stuff until you're together, and are able to talk it fully. Where, in some ways, this is a perfect group for the open meeting law, where I worry about it a little bit less, because you're not managing a whole lot of other things. You're really talking about one issue, and you intend to talk about it, with, sort of have a full conversation out loud about it. A lot of this training is really more relevant when you're dealing with personnel issues and a bunch of other stuff. That's a lot harder.
All right, I just want to clarify. I think open meeting law is great. Transparency is great. I was just laughing at the.
Oh, no, I understand. I'm just adding it. It can be, it adds bureaucracy to something that is, as a policy matter, an easy choice.
Yeah, I just didn't want to make it seem like I thought it was bad, because I don't.
Okay, any final thoughts related to open meeting law? And then we're going to switch gears again. We're going to be doing a lot of gear switching. We only have about 40 minutes left, and we're trying to generate as much discussion while giving everyone the same amount of background. So this first meeting is going to seem a little more administrative, and that's because it is. So I'm going to try to, in the next 7 minutes, kind of give a small background of the parcel as it relates to the master plan, the housing production plan, and the 2015 zoning change, and then we're going to open the floor for questions related to that. So there were a number of different charrettes that have been done on this site that incorporates not just the Waterfield site, but the entire Waterfield block, potentially outfitting the entire block with mixed-use retail. So these are a number of studies that have been done on the site since 2005. Affordable housing was always going to be a component of it, and it was a question of what percentage would be by right and what percentage wouldn't be by right. So that was since 2005, the parcel was being looked at, and then in 2015 there were zoning changes. This is showing 3 distinct areas within the Center Business District that are planned unit development districts, showing that these are the 3 areas for more intense development relative to the other parts of the downtown. So what this was trying to do was to conglomerate sites for more integrated development, make housing and housing or mixed use by right, meaning housing above some type of commercial entity. The idea is that between these 3 areas, that the goal in terms of what there was a market demand study done at the time to figure out how what is the market for these types of units in the downtown area, and based upon the physical constraints of the downtown, and what was the market demand study showed was that we could probably support about 250 new units downtown total. So this is in the entirety of the Center Business District, 250. And what's required now, so if you're building anything above 25 units, is that 10% of the units are required to be affordable at the 80% AMI level. We're going to discuss that a little bit of what that means, the 80% of AMI. And then 5% was middle income. So this is kind of the average median income of the area. So this is what's required right now in the downtown, whether you're in one of these PUD sites or not. If you do provide more affordable housing, you can get a height bonus. So you can go taller than what's allowed by right or even by a special permit. So housing production plan, there's really just kind of, one major goal is to increase the supply. Sorry, there are 2 major goals to the housing production plan. That's it. It's a very long document and goes through a lot of different it's a menu of options, all these different strategies that we can use, but there's really just 2 goals. This first goal being increasing the supply of affordable housing to keep us in safe harbor. And that can be done in several different ways. One of the first target we did receive, which was we got our HPP certified by approving the 19 to 35 River Street project. So that allowed us to go into safe harbor. The target 2 now is just trying to achieve that 10% or potentially the 0.5% or 1% to keep us in safe harbor. So one goal of the HPP is just to keep us in safe harbor. The second goal is to increase the supply of what's called naturally occurring affordable housing. So these are what most people can, when you think of in your head as affordable housing, what does that mean? That's something that people can actually afford. That's what this is. So 2 major goals. This is, so you can see here that these are a number of different strategies in the HPP. I'm going to talk quickly now about area median income. So what does this mean? So we are in the Boston, Cambridge, Quincy area. So many people think that the area median income is specifically the town of Winchester, but it's actually, we're in the Boston, Cambridge, Quincy area. So someone who's at 80% of AMI, 4-person family, you can see here is it's assuming 2 parents and 2 dependents. So you're assuming it's about a $50,000 per salary. So the types of people that are qualifying for 80% and below, you can see here the 80, 60, and 30, 50. These are hospital workers, service workers, DPW, fire department, clerks, a lot of administrative secretaries, administrative assistants. So these are people that are working every day, making a paycheck of about $50,000 for that 80% and below. You can see that the 30% and below for a 4-person is $40,000. The average minimum wage right now translates to about 26K. So so someone even in 1 person is below, someone who's doing minimum wage is making below 30% of AMI. The rents are corresponding to that. These are the maximum rents. Sorry that this is a lot of numbers, and I'm trying to go kind of quickly here, but there will be time for questions. The easiest way to do questions is through the question and answer. That way we can answer it fully if we don't have it now, and there's a record of those answers. So back to the HPP. This site, the Waterfield lot site, was called out specifically as to commit suitable public land to housing. There was a vote on it as well at town meeting to commit this land to affordable housing. This also fits into the master plan that was finished in 2020 to promote these types of housing near transit. And as well as they can enable new public spaces. So that was all I had. Now we're going to break for a second to kind of open the floor up for questions and see kind of how much we can exhaust those questions. So I'm going to go back to here.
Can I just add, for the task force members and the public, we are going to be providing you with a timeline that kind of walks through when all this stuff happens. So you'll get a reference document that will just, put on paper the timeline of when these various town actions happened with respect to planning and the housing production plan, just to help. There's a lot of information flying around, so that'll be coming out to you in the next with the next package and be posted on the website as well.
Thanks for that. Assuming you said you had your hand up first.
Yeah, I just had a quick question. I was just curious, the percentage of affordable housing we have right now, and how is that relative to the other towns around us?
Sure. So right now, including the River Street project, we are at 3.7. The Cambridge Street project is currently off the books because it got delayed for over a year. It will go back on the books. Once that goes back on the books, we're closer to about 4.4. So I would say on the books, we're still at 3.7, but we're somewhere in that 4.5 range. The census just came out, so there's going to be some wiggle room there within a few hundred houses. That's not exact, but for points of clarification, 3.7 and 4.4, 4.5. Paul, you're next.
Yeah, thank you. I kind of have a three-part question.
Please.
I want to make sure my assumptions are correct. Number one, that 10% goal, that's not a mandate, right? That's just something that we have to strive towards and show progress to. Second part, I want to make sure my assumptions right. The people that do qualify for affordable housing, you had mentioned like most of those people are fall in that bracket, school teachers, nurses, DPW workers, but we can't guarantee that it would be folks from within our community, correct? It's kind of people that qualify get put into a lottery system, and it's the luck of the draw.
So there's oh, sorry.
And thirdly, what percentage of our master plan that I think was set in 2015 or 18 has been met so far with reference to the downtown area? Thank you.
Sure. In terms of local preference, I don't know. So that's what you're talking about. Marty Jones, maybe.
Yep.
Or
you want to let me answer those questions?
That would be great. That would be great, Lynn. Thank you. Please.
So great. So with regard to showing progress towards the 10%, the issue is if you haven't met your 10% or you're not keeping up with your housing production plan, developers can come in and force the issue and file a 40B, and probably a much longer discussion. But if you're not taking local actions, then you're vulnerable to having a project come in that you might not have as big a say in as this particular project. With regard to your question about can people locally have a priority, the state does allow for projects to have up to 70% local preference on units. And I don't see why they wouldn't allow that for Winchester. So there is that opportunity that when the permits are granted, that there is a request that 70% of the affordable units have a local preference, and that's for people living and working in the community or have children that are in the school system. I cannot speak to the master plan question.
I can, so in terms of number, in terms of number of things that have been completed by the master plan, we've, I don't know, I guess the first thing that I can say is that we've started studying specific areas in town, but that are part of the master plan. Doing an HPP wasn't part of the master plan, but implementing it is. And although it's not a law for us to do it, the town and the select board did adopt the housing production plan in 2018, and they committed to striving to produce housing of this type. Follow up.
What percentage of that plan were accomplished so far or achieved?
During the past year, so the plan was finished in March of 2020. So we're just at about 16 months, and we're definitely behind in committing to that master plan. But this was,
Is your question, Paul, about the 250 units and how we've done in getting those 250 units downtown?
Not necessarily. It's the whole. There was mention of a master plan for the whole downtown, and what percentage of that plan I know involves.
Oh, sorry, gotcha. So this is not a master plan of the downtown. This is the master plan for the entirety of town. That's what I was talking about. So the master plan 2030 has a number of different things that talk about sustainability and transit and how we move around. Bike and pedestrian. That has nothing to do with this line. So the master plan talks about overarching principles of town and what to do. I'm not referencing the downtown master plan.
Okay. Actually, I would think this project, as it stands, is an individual project, but I think it should be looked at in the concept of the whole master plan and what else is going on in the community. But thank you for that clarifications.
I did also want to follow up on the SHI question about surrounding towns. I just took a quick look. Woburn is at 10.5%, Arlington is at 5.7%, and Belmont is at 6.5%. So, and this doesn't take into account the fact that the 2020 census data we're hearing is coming out in September. So that will probably put most towns behind a little bit more once the units get counted.
Well, could I ask to dig into the comment you just made a little bit more. In terms of taking this into account relative to the rest of the master plan and what else is going on in town, can you just explain more? I don't totally follow what you're thinking.
Well, a couple points, just like the parking situation, this lot won't solve all the parking issues downtown. So I think we have to look at it as a total picture. Where else can we gain parking spots? As far as the affordable housing, if I remember correctly, it's like 40 units proposed as is right now, which to me, seeing where we stand, and it's just a small, it would only move the scale a small tick. Are there other opportunities in addition to a percentage of the units down there? Are there other opportunities in town to make greater progress in it? Because it's like, if not, I think it's just like putting a Band-Aid on a major issue or problem. So I think just like when you're building any building, you might do the first, the foundation first, the first floor first, the second floor, but you look at the whole 20-story building rather than just one floor at a time. But every floor is important.
All right, in the issue of time, there's a lot more here. So we have to talk about the public procurement of land disposition in general by town council, and then the Civico proposal, at least the summary of the bare bones, which is going to get into a lot of what you're talking about. The fact that 40 units actually gives us 1 year of safe harbor, so that it's a huge bang for the buck in terms of 40 units, not thinking like a lot, that actually gives us 1 whole year of safe harbor. But I'm gonna turn it over to Mina and Jillian to talk about the public procurement process and how the LDA works and where we are with that. Again, I know this. If the questions, if they come into your head, I would advise you to use the Q&A function, and that allows us to answer them at a later time. So if something gets into your head, you just want to ask, maybe we can't get to it, but please use that function. So I'm going to turn it right over to Mina.
Thanks, Brian. And again, there's a lot to cover, and I know there's a lot of information coming at you at once. We talked about some of the important pieces of how public procurement fits into this. Keep in mind, and let's just start with sort of where we are. The Civico proposal was a result of a procurement under Chapter 30B, Mass General Laws, Chapter 30B. 30B is the statute that governs procurement of all kinds of goods and services by municipalities and by state agencies. It also covers in 30B-16 the procurement or disposition of land, is a term that the statute uses, by cities and towns. And the process between a regular procurement for pencils at the school or computers at the school, et cetera, versus for the disposition of land differs quite a bit. There is still a need to issue an RFP, put out basically what the town is looking for, what it's trying to get back, and get proposals from it. Importantly, with land, the statute recognizes effectively, or the legislator recognized, that it's not the same always as getting the best price or the lowest price if you're buying, or the highest price if you're disposing. There are sort of a multitude of factors that go into land. And so with respect to this particular project, the RFP followed a form that the town has used a couple of times in RFPs like this, to ask for a mix of qualitative factors, including the amount of affordable housing, the design of the project, sensitivity to issues, or at least this was the goal. And again, folks, I'm not suggesting everything is perfect. I'm just trying to say what the goals of the RFP are. Sensitivity to issues like parking, coordination with the work that might be happening in the T and elsewhere downtown, et cetera. As I said earlier, in terms of who is authorized to issue an RFP, towns essentially can issue an RFP, or select boards can issue an RFP anytime. to get a sense of what the marketplace would provide for whatever it is that they're looking for on the land disposition piece. Town meeting is the entity, the only entity in town that can control the disposition of land, the sale of land or leases, essentially everything but your very temporary license where someone says, can we park a truck here for a couple of days? Anything over a year essentially has to go through town meeting. So the procurement process was followed in this case after vetting of what the RFP should look like by the board. It then town meeting actually got kind of blessed the issuance of an RFP. Again, didn't have to, but select board asked for that and was told it could do that. The purposes of the RFP identified affordable housing and mixed use. So it wasn't purely affordable, but that was an important component of it. It didn't ask for sort of a separate price proposal, which you sometimes do see in some bids. It's not required under 30B16 for land. There is both a decision of the court making that clear, as well as guidance from the Inspector General's office, who kind of oversees procurement or has the accountability office for procurement in the state, making clear the distinctions between buying or selling widgets and things versus disposing of land. So the upshot is putting everybody on an even playing field before the bids come in, and then a selection is made that follows what the bid called for. And that's the process that we talked about earlier, and that's kind of what led to the questions. I think Enzo asked the question of, when would you have to go back out to bid? And the short answer to that is the line is somewhere where other bidders who either didn't bid or might have already bid would have done something differently given the differences in what the ultimate deal looks like. So the particular bid that is out there now and that has Civico and Penrose has those features to it. Within that, there's still a lot of room for negotiation on the details, but it does have to include the affordable housing feature, and it does have to include some mixed use, and it would obviously have to be for Waterfield because that's the parcel in question. One other key point, and just I think where again, sort of trying to get everybody on the same page of sort of the where we are piece of this. Town meeting was basically asked to do its last job legally this spring. So the town meeting process was to approve the land development agreement. I'll let Jillian get into sort of what is typically in a land development agreement, what was in this particular one, and the long-term lease, which is effectively the real estate document governing the use of this property for the long term as between the town and the tenant, Civica. That was sort of the last approval that town meeting, or the only approval that town meeting had to have a say in. And as everybody knows, the result is because of the referendum, that approval hasn't been reached. So whatever input you have, whatever the select board may be able to negotiate, assuming Civico's open to it, everybody's happy with the final result, and the board puts it back before town meeting. Town meeting still needs to approve that land development agreement / the lease, or at least authorize the board to enter into a lease at that point. And I should also add that a lease doesn't have to be negotiated before town meeting votes on it. They can authorize a lease and leave certain details to it. They just have to get the basics like the term and again, which parcel and for what use. Any questions about sort of that high level of the process before I turn it over to Jillian on the LDA? Okay.
All right. Thanks, Mina. So I'll just chat briefly about the LDA, what they are in general, and how this one shaped up in particular. So LDA obviously stands for Land Development Agreement in this case. And LDAs really can take whatever form they need to depending on the project. Obviously, real estate is very fact dependent and case by case. And so LDAs by extension end up being very tailored to particular projects, particular properties. And it's not common to have LDAs that are super consistent from one site to another, one project to another. So we really took the opportunity here to make the LDA as shaped and tailored to this project and the town's wants as much as we could, because we obviously had the bandwidth to do that. So this LDA really governs the stage of the project from selection of the RFP to when the developer actually breaks ground on the property, that time period. Once the developer breaks ground, that would be the start of the ground lease, and the ground lease would then take over and control from that breaking of the ground through obviously the 99-year term, the construction of the project, and then the future operation of the project. So that leaves the question, what happens between the selection of the RFP and the actual breaking of the ground? A lot of that process has to do with developers' diligence and their financing and permitting. So the LDA obviously describes the exact property that's governed by the whole project, the deposits that the developer has to put down at various milestones. And then it talks about the things that the parties intend to do between now and when the ground lease actually commences. The most important part of that, obviously, is the negotiation of the ground lease, which is a very involved process. Part of the reason why you do an LDA rather than just signing the ground lease up front is because the ground lease is so involved. Obviously, with a term of 99 years, you want to make sure that everything is thorough, well thought out. It's going to end up being a very, very long document. So you put this LDA in place that kind of hits on the most essential parts of the ground lease to make sure that those are nailed down, but then leaves open the minutia for that diligence process between the time the LDA is signed and you actually break ground. So the ground lease negotiation has milestones in and of itself. And then, of course, there's a key terms of ground lease, a term sheet, as I'll refer to it, that was attached to the LDA. I'll get into that at the end of this discussion. But other than the ground lease in general, the developer has some due diligence rights. Of course, the entire LDA being subject to town meeting. So this document is not yet operative and wouldn't be operative until it was approved at town meeting. But once approved and effective, the developer would have certain access rights to the property to conduct environmental inspections, other surveys, those sorts of things, title inspections, to make sure that they are satisfied with the condition of the property and able to move forward. All of that would then play into their ability to do their design, permitting, get their various approvals and financing, all of which are subject to certain milestones in terms of an overall time frame to make sure that they are moving along in the process. Other than that, there's a number of standard provisions in here relating to insurance that they need to carry in order to be on the property in the first place, indemnity if they, displace some soil during their inspections, obviously making sure they put things back, that the town's indemnified and covered for anything they do on the property, warranties and representations, legal minutia that I won't bore everybody with. But that is the gist of the LDA itself. Beyond that, there were a number of exhibits relating to the escrow for those deposits, plans showing the actual site of the property, and then most importantly, the material terms of the ground lease, that term sheet that we talked about. So I won't get into too much detail on these specific issues because I know a number of them are pulled out into individual discussions for this group. The most important one obviously being the term of the ground lease, which we'll talk about, I believe, later this evening. But we did hit on the issues that we essentially are so important to the town that we wanted to nail down now without having to really flesh out the minutia the same way that you would with any kind of LOI entering into a lease, to make sure that the town's most essential items are nailed down early without giving the developer an opportunity to negotiate them away further down the line. That was the purpose of this term sheet. So we got into the term of the lease itself, the property condition, the rent, obviously, the permitted uses, certain terms relating to the actual construction of the project, environmental issues, maintenance and repair, the developer's ability to make future alterations after the initial construction of the project, likewise their ability to assign or sublet the site after the initial construction of the project, or I guess during, which of course the answer is they can't, they have to actually build the thing. Similarly, insurance, indemnification, other legal minutia. But that is the gist of the ground lease and the term sheet. And I'm happy to answer any questions on that before we move on.
Well, yeah, I'm looking at the time, and we clearly have to rework a little bit of this schedule at the moment. So what I think I'm going to do is that I would imagine everyone would like to finish on time, which is in really 8 minutes, but we're going to lie and say that's actually 10 minutes. So we'll go to 7:02 at the earliest. But what I'd like to do, we were going to potentially talk about the design as the priority area. But it sounds like we'll go directly into the Civico proposal summary and see where it kind of compares to the other respondents. So I'm gonna turn this over to Marty to do these. There's 2 slides that kind of talk about the major Civico, like the features of the property. So why don't you go right ahead, Marty?
Yeah, thank you, Brian. And the purpose of this for the task force was really just to summarize on 2 slides some of the key features of the building. The entire proposal is on the town website on the Waterfield page under Civico RFP. So I'm sure you've taken a look at it. It's a very lengthy document, but this was trying to just pull some high-level key things about the building out. So it's 60 apartments. They're a mix of studio, 1, 2, and 3 bedroom apartments. It is all rental. I think there's been a little confusion about that. It's mixed income, and it's mixed income with a whole variety of income ranges. And we'll talk more in detail about the income ranges and how they affect the financing, because in building these mixed income developments, each income level comes with different funding sources that might be available to help support the construction, and also different regulations and requirements as far as who can live there and the process for selecting tenants. So we'll try to do in a future meeting a little bit of an Affordable Housing 101 to help the task force understand how developments like this are financed, which is quite different than financing of, say, a River Street or even 416 Cambridge, which are more typical multifamily developments. Even though they do contain some affordable housing, the structure of this financing is very different. There's some key building amenities that I just wanted to note. You can see a little bit of that in this sketch. There's a 2nd floor terrace, lots of outdoor space, also a 4th floor community garden for the residents. Some people call these French balconies. Some people call them Juliet balconies. It's really not a full balcony, but it's an ability to at least get some fresh air, which we all know is really important, having lived through what we've gone through with COVID the past couple of years. There'll be a management office on site, a co-working space that'll be accessible to both the public and residents. That's on the 1st floor of the apartment building. And of course, this building will be a fully accessible building with an elevator. There'll be a number of units that are fully accessible to people with many different types of disabilities. So this will provide a resource for people who have not been able to find accessible apartments in Winchester. The next slide, this just hits on 3 other key areas. Parking, we've talked about that a lot. There are 2 levels of indoor parking for 40 spaces for the public and 45 spaces for residents. Those are on 2 different levels, so they're separated and can be monitored and managed efficiently. There will be electric vehicle car charging stations and resident bicycle storage as part of the building. Sustainability, the developers proposed an all-electric building, all-electric mechanical systems, some very high performance design of the building enclosure itself to meet high standards, rooftop solar, and looking at the site infrastructure, trying to have pervious pavement wherever they can, and other green stormwater infrastructure features. For the public, all of us that are going to be walking by, the part of the building that fronts along Waterfield Street will have two small retail spaces, likely two businesses that would front onto Waterfield Street, and one of them would also likely spill into the courtyard, which is on the interior of the site. Civico has talked about this being a very accessible public outdoor space with people walking to and from the T. They're designing a sort of small stage and performance space where there could be events for the community in that area. And they're also proposing to retain the Chamber of Commerce building. They've suggested a lot of different uses for the building. This has not been nailed down 100%. The project is in concept drawings, obviously, at this point, until they get into permitting and have the chance to talk to more people in the community. So they've talked about some possible uses for that building, but that will certainly be determined later as the design, permitting, and community process continues. So that at a high level are the key features of this building. Hopefully this might be something that people can hold on to as a sort of reference point as we get into the details of the discussion about the Civico proposal. I thought it was way too much for us to try to get into financing tonight. The group of us planning this realized we've got to talk about the financing side of it in much more detail. So those aspects of the proposal will be discussed at a later meeting. And we will be also sending more information on the affordability mix and how that works as part of your briefing materials for a future meeting.
Marty, this is Paul. Thank you very much. Can we just go back to that previous slide?
Yep, Brian's got the slides, so.
Okay, great, thank you. What's the difference between the 60 apartments and then if I add up the mixed income community, I think that comes out to about a little less, couple of units less. What's the difference between the two?
Is my math wrong?
Marty, I think there's a typo. The market rate should be 20, if I recall from
studying
this diligently in June.
Look at that. So putting this together, thank you for looking at this. So it should be 20 market rate. Apologies, we will fix that before it gets posted on the website. If we move that to 20, does that now make the math work?
I think it does.
Yeah. Great. Thanks for catching that, Paul and Stephanie.
Well, the latest is 20 market and 40 affordable, not 1545.
That leave was presented to town meeting was a 20-40 split, if I recall correctly.
Correct.
A 66.7% market affordability. So yeah, 40 out of 60. Yeah. The floor is still open for questions related to kind of the anything here. I do see the time. Like Marty said, we're going to be sending out information before the next meeting. Questions, I believe, are going through the manager's office, and all of there will be a list of questions answered that we will put back on the Waterfield Task Force website. It feels, I'm sure, a lot of very top heavy tonight in terms of a whole bunch of people talking at you. That's not the intention for the rest of the meetings. It's probably going to be more of 10 to 15 minutes of kind of a background and overview and then actual discussion. So I hopefully that you will return and this hasn't scared you off too much. I think, with that, I think that it'd be a good point to stop unless there were kind of any kind of final overarching questions that you like, something, for instance, that you really want to get from Lynn and LDS Consulting, or just kind of anything information-wise before we adjourn for the evening.
And I might just want to add, I think, Brian, you talked a little bit earlier at Bill's suggestion about possibly sending out a survey. I think, again, a reminder to the task force members that at any time you have a question or think of a question you'd like answered, you can certainly email Lisa's office and put your question to her so that we can answer the questions and get back to you. So that's always going to be open, and the same for the public. If there are any particular questions, we're trying to make this process responsive to people's specific questions. So that is available.
Marty, are there any plans that have been drawn or any layouts that have been made for suggested locations for additional off-site parking that might be a condition of the purchase or the sale or lease?
That has not been specifically discussed or addressed, Bill, to my knowledge. I don't think that that's been looked at.
Thank you.
Not as part of the RFP, but there have been structured parking scenarios that have been studied in the downtown, and I can give you those feasibility studies. Is essentially what they were.
I'd find that interesting and possibly helpful to have some idea of what people might have proposed in the past.
We can provide that.
Thank you.
All right, I think that we're ready to adjourn. Again, sorry for all of the admin, but we will see you again next, I want to say September 13th, or if there's a meeting before that. I believe it's September 13th, Lisa?
It is September 13th. The meeting starts at 4, so I don't want you guys to be an hour late. We'll be sending you a lot of follow-up information based on the questions that you raised tonight, and including things like parking. So I think your major homework between now and then is to make sure that anything we presented today, you've got your questions answered, that you have more materials that we need to review for the next meeting. Okay. Thank you all very much. I know Stephanie dropped off, so I think that's it. I'll just circle back.